The sun was a malevolent eye, staring down on a land bleached of color. It was a place of endless sand and jagged rock, a graveyard for anything foolish enough to wander too far from the asphalt ribbon that bisected it. This was Jake's world, a world of rust, oil, and the lonely whisper of the wind. His life was a monotonous rhythm of wrenching, welding, and waiting for the next unlucky traveler whose engine had given up its ghost. His garage, little more than a corrugated tin shack with a diesel generator, was a beacon of hope or a final stop depending on who you asked. It was a Tuesday when the silence was broken not by the distant rumble of a truck, but by the ethereal glint of something out of place. A shimmer of silver, half buried in a dune far off the main road. Jake, his skin weathered like old leather, squinted. Curiosity, a dangerous emotion in this desolate expanse, pulled him onto his ATV. The closer he got, the more the scene revealed its tragedy. A sleek, silver coupe, its front end crumpled like a discarded can, was a testament to a high-speed collision with an unseen rock. But it was what lay beyond the wreckage that stole his breath. A woman, clad in a wedding dress, was stumbling aimlessly, her movements slow and disoriented. The once pristine lace was now torn and stained with desert grit. Her veil, a tattered flag, streamed behind her in the hot wind. She was beautiful, with a face that looked as though it belonged on a magazine cover, now pale and smudged with dirt. Jake killed the engine of his ATV. "Hey," he called out, his voice a rough rumble against the silence. She didn't react, she just kept walking, her feet dragging through the sand. He approached her cautiously, half expecting her to be a mirage. Up close, her eyes were wide and vacant, a perfect reflection of the empty desert around them. He gently put a hand on her shoulder. She flinched, but didn't pull away. "You're all right now," he said, his voice softer than he'd intended. "Come on, we'll get you some water." Back at the garage, Jake gave her a bottle of cool water and a worn blanket to sit on. He wasn't a man given to grand gestures, but the sight of her shivering in the oppressive heat was enough to stir something within him. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. She looked at him, her brow furrowed in confusion. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She shook her head slowly, a single tear cutting a clean path through the grime on her cheek. Jake sighed. "All right. Don't worry about it, we'll figure it out." She was a ghost, a bride with no groom, no memory, and a wrecked car that held no clues beyond a half-empty box of expensive chocolates and a discarded, jewel-encrusted earring. Jake, in a rare moment of whimsy, named her Willow. "You look like you need a place to root," he'd said, gesturing to the single, ancient willow tree that somehow survived near his shack. Days turned into a week. Willow, or the woman Jake now called Willow, started to find her footing. Her initial days gave way to a quiet determination. She couldn't remember her past, but she was eager to help with the present. She swept the dust from the garage floor, organized Jake's tools with an unnerving precision, and even passed him wrenches as he worked. Her hands surprisingly strong and deft for someone who looked so delicate. "You're not built for this," Jake grunted one afternoon as she helped him wrestle a rusted manifold from an old pickup. "I don't remember what I'm built for," she said, her voice soft but steady. "But this feels right. It feels real." Jake felt a warmth he hadn't known in years, a feeling that had nothing to do with the desert heat. He found himself looking forward to her quiet presence, her small, knowing smiles, the way she would watch him work, her eyes now filled with a flicker of life. He found himself telling her stories about his life, about the family he had long since lost touch with, about the desert he both loved and loathed. The shattered coupe sat in a corner of the garage, a constant reminder of her forgotten life. Jake was determined to fix it, or at least figure out what had happened. He found a partially burned invitation under the passenger seat. The elegant script was smudged, but a logo remained, a stylized crest featuring a swan. On the back, a name was scrawled in what that looked like a man's handwriting. "Marcus." "Marcus," Jake said, holding the paper out to her. Does that name mean anything to you? Willow's face remained blank. No, she said, a hint of sadness in her eyes. Nothing. The tranquility was shattered one afternoon by the sound of an expensive engine. A black Mercedes, impossibly clean, pulled up to the garage. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, his face a mask of calculated concern. I'm looking for a missing woman, he said, his eyes scanning the yard. She was driving a silver coupe. A bride. Have you seen her? Jake, his gut twisting, sized him up. He was too smooth, too polished for this place. The man's gaze lingered for a moment on Willow, who had ducked behind a stack of old tires. Nope, Jake said, leaning against a jacked-up truck, his arms crossed. Haven't seen a thing, just me and the dust out here. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. You're sure? A woman in a wedding dress is hard to forget. I've got a lot on my mind, Jake lied easily. Now if you'll excuse me, I've got work to do? The man gave a curt nod and drove away, but not before casting one last, unnerving glance at the silver coupe. Jake's blood ran cold. This wasn't a worried groom looking for his bride. This was a hunter. Willow, he said, walking over to her. We're leaving. Now. He didn't know where they were going, but he knew they couldn't stay. He loaded a few essentials into his own truck, and they set off, leaving the garage behind. The nearest town was a day's drive away, and every mile felt like a lifetime. They were in the small, dusty diner of the town of Salvation when they saw him again. The man from the Mercedes, he was sitting at a booth, talking to a local sheriff. His eyes met Jake's, and a cruel smile spread across his face. He stood up and began to walk towards them. So there you are, my love, he said, his voice dripping with faux concern. Everyone's been so worried. He reached for Willow's hand, but Jake stepped in front of him. She's not going anywhere with you. The man's smile vanished. This is a family matter. A very, very private matter. The tension in the diner was palpable. Willow's eyes, wide with fear, darted between the two men. The man's face, once a vague blur in her mind, was now starting to come into focus. She heard his voice in her memory, not a loving tone, but a snarl. You've ruined everything, she heard him say. You won't get away with this. The memory hit her like a physical blow. The fight in the car, the accusations, his rage as she confronted him with the evidence of his embezzlement. She had been on her way to tell the authorities. He had tried to stop her, had run them off the road. The wedding, the beautiful dress, it had all been a sham. Marcus, she said, her voice a gasp. Your name is Marcus. The man's face hardened. He took a step forward, but Jake was ready. A single, powerful punch sent Marcus sprawling. Get out of here, Jake growled, his fists clenched, and don't you ever come back. The sheriff, a portly man named Johnson, had seen enough. He hauled a dazed Marcus to his feet and read him his rights. As he did, the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place for Willow. Her name was Elena Vanderbilt. She was a millionaire heiress, her family's fortune built on real estate and tech. She had been engaged to Marcus, a high-flying CEO, only to discover he was using her family's company for his own shady dealings. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, lawyers, and a reunion with her frantic family. They were grateful, overjoyed, but to Elena, they felt like strangers. The life they were offering her, the life she had once lived, felt alien. She was no longer the naive bride-to-be. She was Willow, the woman who had found a purpose in a desert garage. A week later, Elena, now dressed in a simple pair of jeans and a t-shirt, stood in the doorway of Jake's garage. He looked up from under the hood of an old pickup, a smudge of oil on his cheek. I need a job, she said, a smile finally reaching her eyes. Jake wiped his hands on a rag and grinned. I've got a lot of cars to fix, and a lot of parts to organize. You're pretty good with a wrench, you know. She walked into the garage, the desert sun no longer a threat, but a familiar friend. She was home. She was no longer a lost bride or a forgotten heiress, but something new, something real. She was Jake's apprentice, and she was finally, truly, found.